The guests had just settled into their seats, the air thick with excitement and the scent of fresh flowers. Soft music played in the background, and all eyes were fixed on the bride as she walked down the aisle, glowing with happiness. It was supposed to be the most beautiful day of her life. The day she had dreamed about since she was a little girl. The day she would finally say, "I do" to the love of her life. But no one in that room, least of all the bride, could have imagined how the next few moments would unfold. Just as the officiant was about to begin the ceremony, a commotion erupted near the entrance. The doors swung open with a loud bang, and suddenly, uniformed police officers stormed into the wedding hall. Gasps filled the air as guests turned in shock, eyes wide, hands clutching their mouths. The bride, standing at the altar in her pristine white gown, froze. Her heart pounded as the officers moved forward, their faces tense and serious. And then it happened. One officer stepped forward, locking eyes with the groom. His voice was steady but firm as he spoke the words that sent a chill through the entire room. "We have a warrant for your arrest." A stunned silence followed. It was as if the world had stopped. The bride's veil trembled as she let out a shaky breath, trying to process what was happening. The man she was about to marry, the man she trusted, loved, and planned her future with, was being taken away right in front of her eyes. The groom's face turned pale. He raised his hand slightly, his mouth opening as if to protest, but no words came out. The guests whispered frantically among themselves, their voices filled with confusion and disbelief. "No, no, this has to be a mistake," the bride finally stammered, her voice breaking. "This can't be real." But it was real, and it was happening right before her eyes. Tears welled up in her eyes as she stepped toward the officers, desperation etched across her face. "Please, what is this about? This is my wedding. This is our wedding," she pleaded, her voice shaking. The officer didn't waver. "Ma'am, please step back." And then, as if in slow motion, the cuffs clicked around the groom's wrists. A sound that echoed through the grand hall like a final, crushing blow. The bride let out a heart-wrenching sob. And just like that, her perfect wedding turned into a nightmare. But the real question remains, what did the groom do? Why was he being arrested on the most important day of their lives? And most importantly, will the bride ever recover from this shocking betrayal? The answers to those questions are more shocking than you could ever imagine. The bride stood there frozen, her mind refusing to accept what her eyes were seeing. The man she had promised to love forever, the man who had looked at her just moments ago with so much warmth, was now standing in handcuffs, his face pale, his body stiff with shock. The guests whispered among themselves, their hushed voices mixing into a chaotic blur of confusion and disbelief. Some of them had their phones out, recording the shocking scene, while others sat in stunned silence, unable to process what was happening. The wedding hall, which had been filled with laughter and excitement just moments ago, now felt heavy with uncertainty. The bride's hands trembled as she took a step forward, her breath coming in short gasps. "Wait, just wait," she begged, her voice barely above a whisper. "There has to be some mistake. He didn't do anything wrong." The officer standing closest to the groom didn't even glance at her. His grip on the groom's arm remained firm, his posture unwavering. "Ma'am, please step back. This is a police matter." Tears welled up in her eyes. Her heart felt like it was being squeezed in a vise. This wasn't how today was supposed to go. Today was supposed to be about love, about new beginnings. Not about this. The groom, who had been silent until now, finally found his voice. His hands were bound, his shoulders tense, but his voice was steady. This isn't right," he said, his eyes darting between the officers. "What am I being accused of?" One of the officers glanced at him but didn't answer right away. Instead, he pulled a piece of paper from his pocket and unfolded it slowly, as if every second of hesitation was deliberate. The bride watched, her stomach twisting with dread. "You are under arrest," the officer said, reading from the paper. "You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." "No," the bride whispered, her body shaking. "No, this isn't happening." The groom's face tightened, his jaw clenching. "For what? What are the charges?" Another officer, a tall man with sharp eyes, stepped forward. "We can't disclose that information here," he said, his tone firm. "You'll be informed at the station." The bride let out a choked sob. This couldn't be happening. Not today. Not to them. She had spent months planning every little detail of this wedding. The flowers, the music, the dress, every moment was supposed to be perfect. And now, All of it had turned into something out of a nightmare. She turned to her parents, who were standing nearby, their faces pale with shock. Her mother clutched her father's arm, looking like she might faint at any moment. Her father's face was tense, his hands curled into fists at his sides. "Dad," she said, her voice barely holding together. "Please do something." Her father swallowed hard and took a step toward the officers. "This is ridiculous," he said, his voice thick with anger. "You can't just come in here and ruin my daughter's wedding without telling us why." The officer remained unfazed. "Sir, we're only doing our job." "But there has to be some kind of misunderstanding," her father insisted. "My daughter's fiancé is a good man. There's no way he's involved in anything criminal." The bride clung to those words. A good man. That's what he was, wasn't he? The man who had held her hand through her worst days. The man who had spent countless late nights comforting her when she couldn't sleep. The man who had promised to love her for the rest of their lives. She looked at him now, searching his face for some kind of explanation, some kind of reassurance. But all she saw was confusion, pain, and something else. Something she couldn't quite name. Then, as if realizing she was watching him, he turned his eyes to her. "I swear, I don't know what this is about," he said, his voice shaking just slightly. "I didn't do anything, baby. You have to believe me." She wanted to believe him. She wanted to scream at the officers to let him go. But something about the way they were acting, the seriousness in their expressions, made her stomach twist even tighter. If this really was a mistake, why did they look so certain? One of the officers gestured to the exit. "Let's go." The groom took a step forward, but before he could move any further, the bride lunged toward him, grabbing onto his arm. "No, you can't just take him like this. He's innocent." Tears streaked down her cheeks, her breath coming in broken gasps. The officer hesitated for half a second, then spoke softly. "Ma'am, please let go." She didn't want to. She didn't want to let go of the man she loved, the man she had planned to spend the rest of her life with. But as the officer started moving again, pulling him toward the door, she felt his arm slip from her grasp. And then, just like that, he was gone. The door shut behind them, leaving the bride standing there, breathless, her vision blurred with tears. The wedding guests were still watching, their faces filled with shock and pity. Some were whispering. Some had already left, unable to handle the tension in the air. But the bride barely noticed any of it. All she could hear was the sound of her own heartbeat, pounding like a drum inside her chest. All she could feel was the emptiness where he had just been standing. And all she could think about was one single haunting question. What if she never saw him again? The bride stood in the center of the wedding hall, her legs feeling weak beneath her. Everything around her blurred. Guests whispering, chairs scraping against the floor, the fading echoes of the police officer's footsteps as they took her groom away. Her veil felt too heavy, her dress suddenly suffocating. It was supposed to be the happiest day of her life, but now she could barely breathe. Her best friend Emily rushed to her side, gripping her shoulders. "We have to go after them," she said, her voice urgent but shaking. "We need to find out what's going on." The bride could only nod. Her hands trembled as she wiped her tear-streaked face, smudging the carefully applied makeup. Nothing mattered anymore. Not the flowers, not the guests, not the perfect wedding she had dreamed of. The only thing that mattered was finding out why the man she loved had just been taken away in handcuffs. Her father had already pulled out his phone, furiously dialing a number. "I'm calling our lawyer," he muttered. "This is insane." Her mother, standing beside him, looked as pale as a ghost. "There must be a mistake," she whispered, almost as if trying to convince herself. "He's not. He couldn't be involved in anything criminal." But was it really a mistake? The bride didn't want to doubt him. She had never doubted him before. But the way the officers had spoken, the seriousness in their eyes, the way they didn't hesitate, it didn't feel like some random misunderstanding. They knew something she didn't. And that terrified her. She didn't wait for the lawyer, didn't wait for an explanation. She grabbed Emily's hand and rushed toward the exit, her heels clicking against the floor as she ran. Outside, the sun was still shining, oblivious to the nightmare unfolding before her. The police car was already pulling away, disappearing down the street. "We need a car," she gasped, her chest tightening. "We need to follow them." Emily didn't argue. They ran to her car, throwing open the doors and jumping in. As soon as the engine roared to life, Emily hit the gas, tires screeching against the pavement. They didn't know where the police were taking him, but there was only one place that made sense: the station. The drive felt like an eternity. Every red light, Every slow-moving car in front of them made the bride's anxiety spiral higher. Her fingers dug into the seat, her heart racing. Do you think he really did something? Emily asked, her voice hesitant, almost afraid of the answer. No, the bride said immediately, shaking her head. He wouldn't. He couldn't. But even as she said it, her mind was racing, searching for any tiny piece of his past that didn't quite fit. Had there been any strange phone calls? Any moments where he seemed distant? Had he ever been nervous around the police? No, none of it made sense. By the time they reached the police station, the bride was out of the car before Emily could even put it in park. She ran up the steps, pushing through the heavy doors, her pulse pounding. Inside, the air was cold, sterile. Officers moved in and out, talking to each other, filling out reports. But all she saw was the front desk. She rushed forward. My fiancé was just brought in, she said breathlessly. I need to see him. The officer behind the desk barely looked up. Ma'am, you'll have to wait. No, she interrupted, slamming her hands down on the counter. You don't understand. He was taken from our wedding. Our wedding? I need to see him. I need to know what's happening. The officer sighed, flipping through some papers. Name? She told him. The officer scanned the list, then frowned slightly, his eyebrows pulling together. I'm sorry, but you won't be able to see him right now. Her stomach dropped. Why not? He's being processed, and the investigation is still ongoing. Investigation. The word sent a new wave of fear through her. What investigation? What is he being accused of? The officer hesitated, glancing at another officer across the room before lowering his voice. I can't disclose that information. A fresh panic surged through her. They weren't just detaining him. They weren't just questioning him. He was being investigated. For something serious. Emily grabbed her arm, pulling her back slightly. Let's call the lawyer, she whispered. They can't keep him here forever without telling us something. The bride felt like screaming, like demanding answers until someone finally told her the truth. But deep down, she knew Emily was right. They needed legal help. They needed someone who would force the police to explain why her fiancé was in a holding cell instead of standing at the altar, slipping a ring onto her finger. As they stepped back, her eyes scanned the station, hoping, desperately, that she'd see him. Just a glimpse. Just something to prove that this was all a nightmare she could wake up from. And then, in the far corner of the station, past the glass walls of the holding area, she saw him. His suit was wrinkled, his tie loosened. His hands were still cuffed, resting on the table in front of him. An officer sat across from him, asking questions she couldn't hear, but it was his expression that sent a chill down her spine. He looked different. Not just scared, not just confused. He looked like a man holding on to a secret that could destroy everything. Her breath caught in her throat. What wasn't he telling her? The bride's breath came in short, uneven gasps as she stood frozen outside the holding area, her eyes locked on the man she thought she knew better than anyone. He looked different now, sitting across from the officer, his body tense, his eyes shadowed with something she couldn't quite name. Fear? Guilt? Or something worse? Her hands trembled as she reached for Emily's arm, gripping it tightly. Do you see his face? She whispered, barely able to get the words out. He looks? I don't know. Something's not right. Emily followed her gaze, watching him through the glass. Maybe he's just scared, she offered, though her voice held doubt. I mean, would you be? He just got arrested on his wedding day in front of everyone. The bride swallowed hard, her throat dry. That was true. Anyone would be shaken. But it wasn't just fear on his face. It was something deeper, something that sent a cold shiver down her spine. Then, as if he could feel her watching, he turned his head. His eyes met hers. For a second, time seemed to stop. She expected him to look relieved, to mouth something, anything, that would give her hope. But instead, his gaze held hers for a moment too long. And then he looked away. Her stomach twisted. That wasn't right. If he was innocent, if this was some huge mistake, wouldn't he be desperate to see her? Wouldn't he be pleading for her to help him? But instead, he looked resigned. Like he knew this was coming. A sudden wave of nausea hit her. No, she murmured under her breath. This can't be happening. Emily tightened her grip on her arm. Maybe he's in shock, she said, though the doubt in her voice was growing stronger. Let's just wait for the lawyer. The lawyer arrived minutes later, an older man with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. He spoke with the officers for a few moments, his voice calm but firm. Then he turned to the bride. They're being very careful with what they're saying, he told her, lowering his voice. But from what I can gather, This isn't just a misunderstanding. They've been watching him for a while. The words made her head spin. Watching him? For what? Her voice cracked as she spoke. But they won't even tell us what he's accused of. They will, the lawyer assured her. Soon. But the fact that they won't say it right away tells me it's serious. The walls around her seemed to close in. The air felt too thin. She shook her head, refusing to believe it. There has to be a mistake. He's a good person. He wouldn't. Her voice broke before she could finish. The lawyer hesitated as if choosing his words carefully. You're sure? The question hit her harder than she expected. She wanted to scream yes. Of course she was sure. She had spent years with this man, planning a future together, believing in him. But now, after everything that had happened, that certainty felt like it was slipping through her fingers. The officer at the desk called the lawyer back over, and as he walked away, Emily turned to her expression serious. I need to ask you something, she said carefully. Has he ever kept anything from you? Anything that felt off? The bride blinked, caught off guard by the question. No, I don't think so. Emily's gaze stayed on her. Think, okay. Really think? The bride's mind raced, flipping through memories as fast as her panicked mind would allow. Their relationship had been filled with love, laughter, and long nights of talking about their dreams. But now, cracks started to appear in places she had never noticed before. The late-night phone calls he always took in another room. The moments he seemed distant, lost in thought. The time he came home with a torn sleeve and a nervous smile, brushing off her questions with a quick joke. At the time, she had told herself they were nothing, that every couple had little things they didn't talk about. But what if those little things weren't so little after all? Her pulse pounded in her ears as she whispered, Oh my God. Emily grabbed her hand. What? What is it? Before she could answer, the lawyer returned, his face unreadable. They've agreed to let me speak with him, he said. But only me? No visitors yet. The bride's heart sank. No. I need to see him. I need to hear from him that this isn't real. The lawyer sighed. I know, but right now you need to prepare yourself, because whatever they're accusing him of is not small. She felt her knees go weak, and Emily had to steady her. The lawyer disappeared behind a door, leaving her standing there with nothing but questions and a growing, unbearable fear. She turned back to the glass wall, her eyes locking onto her fiancé once more. And that's when she noticed it. The officer questioning him had just slid a file across the table. A thick, heavy file. And when the groom opened it, his face drained of color. Not shock. Recognition. He knew what was in that file. He knew exactly why he was here. And that realization shattered something inside her. Because if he knew, then why hadn't he told her? The bride's fingers dug into her palms as she watched him stare at the file, his face draining of color. He wasn't confused. He wasn't protesting. He wasn't demanding answers. He knew. Her stomach twisted painfully. She wanted to believe there was another explanation, that he wasn't hiding something from her. But deep down, something inside her cracked. The truth he had never told her, was sitting in that file, and she had no idea what it was. Emily's voice was quiet, careful. Did you see that? The bride barely nodded, her throat too tight to speak. Before she could process anything further, the lawyer stepped back out, his expression unreadable. He walked toward them, his pace slower than before. The air around them felt thick, heavy, as if something was pressing down on her chest, making it harder to breathe. She forced herself to ask the question that burned on her lips. What did they say? The lawyer hesitated. They have evidence, he said carefully. And it's not minor. Her pulse pounded. Evidence of what? The lawyer looked between her and Emily before finally lowering his voice. They believe he's connected to something from years ago. Something that's only coming to light now. Her heart hammered. Years ago? What could he possibly have done before they met that would lead to this moment? Her voice wavered. What is it? The lawyer's jaw tightened. I don't have all the details yet, but from what I gathered, they think he was involved in something illegal before he met you. And they just found new proof linking him to it. She felt the room tilt slightly. She reached out, gripping the edge of the counter to steady herself. Emily's voice cut through the fog in her head. Wait, this doesn't make sense. If it's from years ago, why would they arrest him now? What changed? The lawyer exhaled. That's the question. The bride felt a rush of panic flood her veins. He swore he had no secrets. He told me everything about his past. I would have known if she stopped, her own words catching in her throat. Would she have known, or had she just believed what she wanted to believe? Emily spoke again, her tone urgent. What if someone set him up? The bride latched onto that idea instantly. Yes. What if? What if this is all a mistake? Someone could have used his name, forged something. Maybe it's not even about him. The lawyer frowned slightly. That's possible. But they seemed confident. And his eyes darkened slightly as he glanced back toward the holding area. He's not acting like an innocent man. The bride flinched. The words echoed in her head, each one sharper than the last. Not acting like an innocent man. But why? If he was guilty, why had he let them build a life together? Why had he stood at the altar, knowing this could happen? And then another thought crept in. What if he knew this was coming? Her blood ran cold. The lawyer was still speaking, but his voice felt distant. I'm going to keep pressing them for details. Right now, don't speak to anyone. Don't answer any calls from reporters, and if anyone asks you questions, refer them to me. The bride barely nodded, her mind racing. She turned back toward the glass wall, watching as her fiancé, her almost husband, lowered his head into his hands. And that's when the second twist hit. A woman walked into the holding area. Not an officer, not a lawyer, someone else. She was dressed in dark clothing, her hair pulled back in a tight ponytail. She walked straight past the officers, her posture stiff, her movements precise. She knew exactly where she was going. The bride's heart lurched as the woman stopped in front of the groom's table. And then he looked up. His entire body tensed. And then her worst fear came true. He knew her. Not in a casual passing way. Not like she was some distant stranger. No. The way his eyes locked onto hers. The way his entire face tightened. It was personal. He knew her. And worse, he had been expecting her. The bride felt like she had been punched in the stomach. She had never seen this woman before. Never heard him mention her. But the way they looked at each other, the silent exchange between them, it was enough to make the room spin. Emily whispered beside her, "Who is that?" The bride couldn't answer, because deep down she already knew one thing. This wasn't just about an old case. This was about a secret. A secret he never told her. And now it was about to destroy everything. The bride felt the world closing in around her as she watched the silent exchange between her fiancé and the mysterious woman. Her chest tightened, every breath feeling heavier than the last. Who was she? Why had he looked at her like that? Like he knew exactly why she was here. Emily gripped her arm. Do you see his face? That's not shock. That's not confusion. The bride barely nodded, unable to tear her gaze away. It was true. He wasn't just recognizing this woman. He was reacting to something deeper, something buried in his past. A past he had never shared with her. The woman leaned forward, speaking in a low voice. Whatever she said, it was meant for him alone. His expression remained unreadable, but his hands curled into fists on the table. Then suddenly he shook his head. The woman's jaw tightened. She said something else, sharper this time. A warning. And that's when it happened. Her fiancé glanced up, his eyes flickering toward the glass where she stood. For the first time since his arrest, he looked at her with real fear. Not fear of the police. Not fear of being caught. Fear of what she was about to learn. The woman turned slightly, her gaze following his. And when she saw the bride watching, something flickered across her face, an emotion the bride couldn't quite place. Not anger, not surprise. Something closer to regret. Then, before the bride could process it, the woman slid something across the table toward him. A small object, barely noticeable. He flinched, his eyes widening slightly, but he didn't reach for it. The officer sitting nearby caught the movement. Hey, what is that? In an instant, the woman pushed back from the table, stepping away with her hands raised, her face perfectly composed. Just a reminder, she said calmly. The officer grabbed the object and examined it. It was a photograph. The bride's breath caught as she strained to see. What could possibly be in that picture? The groom's face hardened, his jaw clenching. The officer looked between them, then at the woman. You can't bring things in without clearance. The woman smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. I just needed him to remember. The officer motioned for her to leave, and she did, walking past the bride without a single glance in her direction. And that was when the final piece fell into place. The bride couldn't stop herself. Wait, she called after her. The woman stopped but didn't turn. Who are you? The bride demanded, her voice shaking. There was a pause, and then finally the woman turned her head just enough to meet her eyes. I'm the reason you're not married right now. And with that, she walked away. The bride's hands trembled as she turned back toward the glass. Her fiancé sat completely still, staring at the photograph in front of him. His expression was no longer just fear. It was devastation. The lawyer hurried back to her side. We need to talk. Now. But the bride barely heard him, because deep down she knew. Whatever secret had just come to light, it was something that had been chasing him for years. And now, it had finally caught up. The bride stood frozen, her heart pounding as the woman disappeared through the station doors. Her words echoed in her mind over and over again. I'm the reason you're not married right now. Her hands trembled as she turned back toward the holding room. Her fiancé, or the man she had thought she knew, was still staring at the photograph. His entire body was tense, as if he were trapped between two impossible choices. Whatever was in that picture, it had shattered something inside him. The lawyer's voice cut through the storm in her head. We need to talk. Now. She barely nodded, allowing him to guide her away from the window. Emily followed, her face filled with unspoken questions. They stepped into a quieter corner of the station, away from the officers and the low hum of voices. The lawyer exhaled sharply. I spoke to the lead detective. They still won't release everything, but I know more now. He hesitated before continuing, his tone cautious. This case goes back nearly a decade, before he met you. The bride felt the sharp pang in her chest. What kind of case? The lawyer looked her in the eye. There was an investigation into a group involved in financial crimes, money laundering, fraud, and some more serious allegations. Back then, your fiancé's name was never officially tied to it. But now new evidence has surfaced. And that woman? She's the one who provided it. The bride's mind raced. But if this was years ago, why now? Why wait until our wedding day? Emily's voice was soft but firm. Because someone wanted to make sure you found out. The realization sent a shiver through her. Someone, maybe even her own fiancé, had spent years keeping this buried. But now, everything was out in the open. She turned back toward the holding area, watching him through the glass. His head was in his hands now, his body language screaming defeat. Emily touched her arm gently. Do you want to go in there? The bride swallowed hard. Did she? Could she? For years, she had built a future with this man. She had trusted him, loved him. But now she wasn't sure who he really was. Still, she needed answers. The lawyer spoke to the officers, and after a moment they nodded. 5 minutes, one of them said. That's all. She stepped inside, her pulse hammering in her ears. The door closed behind her with a heavy click, sealing them off from the rest of the world. He didn't look up at first. His fingers were still gripping the photograph. When he finally raised his eyes to meet hers, they were filled with something she hadn't expected. Not anger, not guilt, regret. She sat down across from him, every muscle in her body tense. Who is she? She asked quietly. He exhaled, rubbing his temples before answering. Her name is Vanessa. His voice was hoarse. She used to be someone I worked with. A long time ago. The bride's stomach twisted. Worked with? Or. He shook his head before she could finish. Not like that. But she knew me before I met you. Before I left that life behind. The words hummed between them. Her voice wavered. So it's true? Everything they're saying? He hesitated for half a second too long. And that was all she needed. Tears burned at the edges of her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. Why didn't you tell me? His expression broke. Because I wanted to be the man you thought I was. A painful silence stretched between them. She had spent years believing in him, trusting that their love was built on honesty. But now she realized she had been living in a carefully crafted illusion. Her voice was barely above a whisper. Did you ever think this wouldn't catch up to you? His gaze dropped back to the photograph. I thought, if I stayed far enough away from it, if I built a different life, maybe it would just disappear. He let out a bitter laugh. I was wrong. She looked at the picture, still upside down on the table. What's in it? His fingers hovered over the edges before finally turning it toward her. Her breath caught in her throat. It was a younger version of him, standing next to Vanessa. But that wasn't what sent ice through her veins. It was the man standing between them. A man she had never seen before. But somehow she knew. She looked up at him, her voice trembling. Who is he? His answer was barely audible. Vanessa's brother. The pieces clicked into place. The reason Vanessa had come. The reason she had waited until the wedding. The reason he had looked so devastated. Because whatever had happened all those years ago, it hadn't just been about money. It had been about a person. Someone who had mattered to Vanessa. Someone who wasn't here anymore. The bride's stomach churned. Did you? He shook his head fiercely. No, I swear. I wasn't the one who, he stopped himself, running a hand over his face. But I was there, and I didn't stop it. Tears blurred her vision. So she wanted me to know. She wanted me to see who you really are. He nodded, his expression filled with something close to defeat. I should have told you. She let out a shaky breath. Yeah, you should have. The officer knocked on the door. Time's up. She stood slowly, her body numb. He didn't reach for her. He didn't beg for her forgiveness. He just sat there, looking at her like he already knew what she was going to do next. And he was right. She took one last look at the man she had almost married, the man she had once thought was her future. Then, without another word, she walked out. Emily was waiting for her outside. Are you okay? The bride inhaled deeply, the weight of everything pressing down on her. No, she admitted. But I will be. The doors of the police station swung open, and for the first time since that terrible moment at the altar, she stepped into the fresh air. She wasn't sure what would come next. But she knew one thing. She wasn't looking back.